The river crossing had nearly killed him, and Darian Morrow knew it showed in every labored step as he dragged himself up the muddy bank toward the flickering light of what he hoped was shelter, and not some fever dream conjured by his freezing brain. His left leg refused to bear his full weight, the old war wound reopened by a tumble against the rocks mid-crossing, and water streamed from his clothes in rivulets that left a trail through the tall grass. He had lost one boot to the current entirely, the other squelched with every uneven stride, and his teeth chattered so violently he bit his tongue and tasted copper. The late autumn storm had swollen the river beyond what the ferryman warned was safe, but Darian had been desperate to reach the next settlement before nightfall, and desperation made fools of even cautious men. Now here he was, alone in the frontier wilderness with darkness closing in and his body threatening to give out entirely. The light resolved into a small farmstead as he drew closer, a sturdy timber house with a stone chimney from which smoke rose in a steady column. A barn stood behind it, and he could make out the silhouettes of chickens roosting in their coop and what might have been a cow in a pen. Relief flooded through him so intensely his knees nearly buckled. Civilization, however remote, meant warmth and possibly medical aid. He pushed forward with renewed determination, though his vision swam and his fingers had gone numb past the point of feeling. He made it to the door and raised one shaking fist to knock, but the effort of lifting his arm combined with the weakness in his leg sent him stumbling forward. His knuckles barely grazed the wood before the door swung inward, and he nearly fell across the threshold. Strong hands caught him before he could collapse completely. Hands that were decidedly larger than a typical human woman's, with a grip that spoke of considerable strength held in careful check. Darian blinked water from his eyes and found himself staring up at a face that sent a jolt of primal fear through his exhausted body, despite the gentleness of her hold. She was an orc, green-skinned, with small tusks that protruded from her lower jaw and pointed ears that angled back from her skull. Her eyes were a warm amber color that seemed to glow in the firelight spilling from the room behind her, and her dark hair was pulled back in a practical braid that fell past her broad shoulders. She wore simple homespun clothing, a tunic and sturdy trousers, and stood nearly a head taller than him despite his own respectable height. "You are injured," she said, and her voice was lower than a human woman's but not harsh. There was concern in it, genuine worry that cut through Darian's instinctive wariness. "Come. Inside. Now." She did not wait for his agreement, simply guided him over the threshold with surprising care given her obvious strength. Darian found himself too cold and too tired to protest, and besides, what choice did he have? Die in the woods or accept help from an orc woman? His commanders from the war would have laughed themselves sick at the irony. He had spent 3 years fighting orcs on the northern border, and now one was lowering him into a chair by her hearth, as though he were made of glass. The warmth of the fire hit him like a physical blow, and he shuddered violently. The orc woman made a low sound in her throat that might have been sympathy and began efficiently stripping away his soaked coat. "Wait," Darian managed through chattering teeth. You cannot," she interrupted firmly but not unkindly. "You shake too much. Let me help or freeze in my chair." "Your choice." Put like that, he subsided and allowed her to peel away the layers of sodden wool and linen. She moved with practiced efficiency, like someone accustomed to tending injuries, and kept her eyes averted from his bare skin in a way that suggested modesty, despite her businesslike manner. When she reached his boots, or rather his remaining boot, she paused and let out a soft huff that might have been amusement. "The river took the other?" she asked. "Yes," Darian admitted. "I should have waited for the storm to pass." You should have, she agreed, working the remaining boot free with careful attention to his swollen ankle. Her touch was surprisingly gentle given the size of her hands. But humans often do foolish things when they are running from something, or towards something, I suppose. She did not press him on which it was, for which he was grateful. Instead, she rose and disappeared into another room, returning moments later with blankets that she wrapped around his shoulders and a simple rough spun shirt and trousers that would be large on him but were blessedly dry. "Change," she instructed, pointing to a screen in the corner of the room. "I will not look. Your modesty is safe." Darian dragged himself to his feet, using the chair for support, and limped behind the screen. His fingers fumbled with the unfamiliar clothing, numb and clumsy, but he managed eventually. When he emerged, the orc woman had busied herself at the hearth, where a pot hung over the flames releasing savory smells that made his stomach clench with sudden fierce hunger. "Sit," she said without turning. "Supper is ready." He lowered himself back into the chair and watched as she ladled thick stew into 2 wooden bowls. She brought him one along with a hunk of dark bread, then settled herself on a stool across the fire from him with her own meal. For a long moment they ate in silence, and Darian was too hungry and too grateful to worry about poisoning or any of the other dire warnings he had heard about orcs and their supposed treachery. The stew was simple but well made, rich with root vegetables and chunks of what might have been venison. The bread was dense and filling. It was the best meal he had eaten in weeks. "Thank you," he said finally, when he had taken the edge off his hunger. "I was not expecting. That is, I am grateful for your hospitality." She looked at him over the rim of her bowl, those amber eyes measuring. "You were not expecting an orc to show kindness." There was no accusation in her tone, only a flat statement of fact. Darian felt heat rise in his face that had nothing to do with the fire. "I did not know this homestead belonged to an orc," he said carefully. "The map showed only a farmstead." "I would not have, that is. You would not have knocked on my door if you had known," she finished for him. Perhaps you would have died in the woods instead. I am Grina, by the way. Grina Stonefist, though I use no clan name now." "Darian Morrow," he offered in return. "And I would like to say I would have knocked regardless, but honesty compels me to admit I do not know what I would have done." Something that might have been respect flickered in her eyes. "At least you do not lie to spare my feelings. That is something." She rose and collected their empty bowls, setting them aside, then retrieved his boots from where she had placed them near the fire. The remaining one she examined critically before setting it on the hearth to dry more thoroughly. The missing one she simply shook her head over. "You need both feet covered before you travel again," she said. "I have spare boots that may fit you, though they will be large. Better too large than none at all." "I cannot take your boots," Darian protested. "You can and you will, because I have 3 pairs and you have none," Grina replied with simple logic. "Also, you will not be traveling anywhere for several days at least. That leg needs rest and your body needs to recover from the cold. You may stay here until you are fit to continue." Darian stared at her, trying to reconcile this practical generosity with everything he had been taught about orcs during the war. They were supposed to be savage, violent, incapable of mercy or kindness toward humans. Yet here was this orc woman offering him shelter, food, clothing, and medical care without asking for anything in return. "Why?" he asked finally. "Why help me?" Grina was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. When she spoke, her voice was softer, tinged with something that might have been old grief. "Because no one should die alone in the cold if it can be prevented," she said. "Because kindness costs me nothing but may mean everything to you. And because I know what it is to be judged by what others expect of my kind rather than by my own actions. Perhaps I am foolish to help a human, especially one who fought in the war if I judge correctly by the scars I saw. But I would rather be foolish and kind than wise and cruel. Shame twisted in Darian's gut. She had seen his scars and known what they meant, yet she had helped him anyway. He thought of the orc villages his unit had burned following orders, and wondered if any of those had been Grina's home. Wondered what had brought her here, alone on a frontier farm with no clan name. "I will not repay your kindness with treachery," he said quietly. "You have my word." "The word of a human soldier means little to most orcs," Grina replied, but there was no bitterness in it. "Still, I will choose to believe you. Now sleep. You need rest more than anything." She showed him to a small room off the main living space, clearly her own bedroom judging by the personal items scattered about. When he protested, she waved him off. "I will sleep by the fire tonight," she said. "You need the bed more than I do. We will argue about it tomorrow if you like, but tonight you will rest properly." Too exhausted to argue further, Darian allowed himself to be installed in the narrow bed. The blankets smelled faintly of pine and wood smoke, and something else, something distinctly foreign but not unpleasant. He thought he would lie awake wrestling with the strangeness of his situation, but instead sleep dragged him under within moments of his head touching the pillow. He woke to morning light streaming through a small window, and the smell of cooking food. His leg throbbed with a deep ache but felt better than it had in days, and the bone-deep chill from the river crossing had faded to a memory. He rose carefully, testing his weight on the injured leg, and found he could walk with only a slight limp. When he emerged into the main room, he found Grina kneeling by the hearth preparing what looked like porridge in a pot. She glanced up at his entrance and nodded approval. "You have more color in your face," she observed. "Good. Sit. Eat. Then you will tell me where you were going in such a hurry that you risked a storm-swollen river." Darian settled into the same chair from the night before and accepted the bowl she handed him. The porridge was thick and sweet, flavored with honey and dried berries. He ate several bites before answering her implied question. "South," he said finally, "to my brother's farm. I received word that he was ill and needed help with the harvest before winter sets in. This is the fastest route, even with the river crossing." "How far south?" Grina asked. 3 days' walk in good weather," Darian admitted. "Perhaps 4 now with my leg." 6 days if you do not allow it to heal properly," Grina corrected. "Or never, if you do something foolish and make it worse. You will stay at least 2 more days, until I am satisfied you can travel without doing further injury." There was no room for argument in her tone, and truthfully Darian was not inclined to argue. His leg did need rest, and the thought of facing the wilderness alone again so soon made his chest tight with remembered fear. "I will stay," he agreed. "Though I should contribute something in return for your hospitality. I can help with chores, at least light ones. I am not entirely useless." A small smile tugged at Grina's mouth, softening the hard planes of her face. "We will see. For today you rest. Tomorrow, if you are stronger, perhaps you can help me repair the chicken coop. Something has been trying to dig under it at night." They fell into an easy routine over the next 2 days. Darian rested and recovered while Grina went about her daily tasks, tending her animals and garden with capable efficiency. He helped where he could, holding boards steady while she hammered or fetching tools from the barn. She was skilled with her hands, he noticed, able to mend and build with equal competence. The farm was small but well maintained, everything in good repair and organized with practical simplicity. On the 3rd morning, Darian woke to find his leg felt nearly normal again, only a slight stiffness remaining. He tested it carefully and found he could walk without limping. Relief flooded through him, followed immediately by an unexpected reluctance. He should be eager to continue his journey, to reach his brother's farm before the weather turned worse. Yet the thought of leaving this place, leaving Grina, felt wrong somehow. She noticed the change in him immediately when he came out for breakfast. "Your leg is better," she said. It was not a question. "Yes," Darian confirmed. "I should be able to travel today if the weather holds." Grina nodded, though something flickered across her face too quickly for him to read. She handed him his breakfast without comment, and they ate in silence. Finally, she rose and disappeared into the back room, returning with a pair of sturdy leather boots. "These were my father's," she said, offering them to him. "He was smaller than most male orcs, and they may fit you well enough. Take them." Darian accepted the boots with careful reverence, understanding the weight of what she was offering. These were not spare shoes, but a personal item, something with memory and meaning attached. "I cannot take these," he said softly. "They are too valuable." "My father is dead," Grina replied, and there was old pain in her voice. "He has no need of boots. You do. He would want them used rather than gathering dust. Please, take them." Darian tried the boots on and found they fit reasonably well, only slightly loose in the heel. They were well made and sturdy, better than the ones he had owned before. He stood and tested them, walking across the room and back. "They fit," he said. "Thank you. This is far more than I deserve." "You deserve kindness as much as any living thing," Grina said. "That you doubt this troubles me." She turned away before he could respond, busying herself with cleaning up the breakfast dishes. Darian watched her, noting the set of her shoulders and the careful way she avoided meeting his eyes. Something had shifted between them over the past 3 days. Some barrier had lowered without him quite noticing when it happened. The thought of walking away and never seeing her again made his chest ache in a way that had nothing to do with old wounds. "Grina," he said carefully. "Why are you alone out here? You mentioned having no clan name. What happened?" She went very still, her hands pausing in their work. For a long moment he thought she would not answer, that he had overstepped some boundary. Then she sighed and set down the bowl she had been washing. "I was cast out," she said quietly. 2 years ago. My clan lived further north in the borderlands. During the war, human soldiers came through our territory. They were wounded, fleeing from a battle that had gone badly. By rights, we should have killed them or turned them away. Instead, I argued that we should help them. I convinced my father to give them shelter and tend their injuries. She paused, and Darian's stomach sank as he began to understand. "One of them betrayed us," Grina continued. "As soon as he was strong enough to travel, he left in the night and returned with a full patrol. They attacked at dawn, killed my father, and burned half our village before we could drive them off. My clan blamed me for the deaths, said I had been weak and foolish to trust humans. The elders gave me a choice: submit to punishment that would have left me crippled, or leave and never return. I chose to leave." Darian felt sick. "I am so sorry, that is. There are no words adequate." "No," Grina agreed. "There are not. I came south, away from the borderlands, and claimed this land. Built this farm with my own hands. I swore I would never trust a human again." She finally turned to look at him, and there was pain in her eyes, but also something else, something that made his breath catch. "Yet here you are. And here I am, having broken that oath." "Why did you help me?" Darian asked. "After everything that happened, why did you let me in?" "Because I am still my father's daughter," Grina said simply. He believed that kindness mattered even when it was difficult, especially when it was difficult. "I will not let what happened turn me into something cruel. I will not let them take that from me too." Darian crossed the room without thinking, moved by an impulse he did not fully understand. He stopped just within arm's reach of her, close enough to see the faint scars on her hands and the way her tusks caught the morning light. "Your father was right," he said quietly. "Kindness matters, and you are one of the bravest people I have ever met, orc or human." Grina's eyes widened slightly, surprise flickering across her features. For a moment they stood frozen, the air between them charged with something neither seemed willing to name. Then Grina stepped back, breaking the spell. "You should gather your things," she said, and her voice was not quite steady. "If you are to reach the next settlement before dark, you should leave soon." Darian wanted to protest, wanted to close the distance between them again and say something, anything, to change the way this felt like goodbye. But he had no right to ask her for more than she had already given. He was a human, and she was an orc, and the world they lived in had no patience for whatever this fragile thing between them might become. So he nodded and went to collect his coat and pack. Grina had cleaned and mended his clothes with the same care she had shown him, and had filled his pack with bread and dried meat enough for several days. When he emerged, she was waiting by the door with his refurbished coat folded over her arm. "The road south is clear for the first 2 miles, she said, slipping back into the practical tone she had used when he first arrived. "After that you will come to a fork. Take the left path. The right leads into marsh country and is dangerous this time of year." "I will remember," Darian promised. He shrugged into his coat and shouldered his pack, then paused at the threshold. "Grina, I thank you for everything. I will not forget your kindness." "Travel safely, Darian Morrow," she replied. "And when you reach your brother, tell him he is fortunate to have family willing to risk rivers in flood season for his sake." There were 1,000 things Darian wanted to say, but none of them would come. Instead, he simply nodded and stepped out into the cool morning air. He made it perhaps 20 paces down the path before he stopped and turned back. Grina still stood in the doorway, watching him leave, and even at this distance he could see the same conflict in her posture that he felt in his own chest. He raised one hand in farewell. She returned the gesture. Then Darian forced himself to turn and walk away, each step feeling heavier than the last. The journey south should have taken 3 days. Darian made it in 2, driven by restless energy and a growing certainty that he had made a terrible mistake. He arrived at his brother's farm to find Daniel Morrow up and about, recovered from the illness that had summoned Darian in the first place. "You are late," Daniel said by way of greeting, though there was warmth in his voice. "I expected you a week ago." "I ran into some delays," Darian replied vaguely. He helped Daniel with the remaining harvest work, throwing himself into the physical labor with an intensity that made his brother give him concerned looks. At night, he lay awake in the guest room and thought about amber eyes and careful hands and a voice saying that kindness mattered even when it was difficult. On the 3rd night, Daniel finally confronted him. "What happened to you?" his brother asked over supper. "You have been like a ghost since you arrived, barely speaking, hardly eating. This is not like you." Darian set down his fork and met his brother's eyes. Daniel was 2 years younger, with the same dark hair and similar features, though he lacked the scars from Darian's time in the war. They had always been close, close enough that Darian knew he could not hide the truth forever. "If I tell you something," Darian said slowly, "will you promise to hear me out before you judge?" Concern deepened on Daniel's face, but he nodded. "Of course. Whatever it is, you can tell me." So Darian told him about the river crossing and finding Grina's farm and everything that had passed between them. He told him about her father and the betrayal, and the choice she had made to be kind despite every reason not to. And he told him, finally, about the feeling he could not shake that he had walked away from something important, something that mattered more than he knew how to express. Daniel listened in silence until Darian ran out of words. Then he sat back in his chair and let out a long breath. "You have feelings for her," Daniel said. "It was not a question." "I think I might," Darian admitted. "Which is insane. I barely know her, and she is an orc which the whole world would condemn us." "The whole world is often wrong about important things," Daniel replied thoughtfully. "During the war, did you ever stop to wonder if what we were told about orcs was entirely true?" Darian blinked, surprised by the question. "Sometimes." "Why?" "Because I have wondered the same thing," Daniel said. "We were taught they were monsters, incapable of mercy or honor. Yet I have heard stories that contradict that. Travelers who were helped by orc settlements. Humans who traded peacefully with orc clans in remote areas. What if we were lied to, Darian? What if the war was built on hatred that had no real foundation?" "That does not change how others see things," Darian pointed out. "Even if we are right, an orc and a human together would face nothing but prejudice and danger." "Probably true," Daniel agreed. "But here is a question for you. Can you live with walking away? Can you spend the rest of your life wondering what might have been if you had been brave enough to try?" Darian had no answer for that. He lay awake again that night wrestling with his brother's words. By morning, he had made his decision. "I am going back," he told Daniel over breakfast. "I do not know if she feels the same way. She probably does not, but I have to tell her the truth. I have to at least try." Daniel smiled and clapped him on the shoulder. "Good. You would have been unbearable to live with if you had not, but be careful, brother. The prejudice you will face is real and dangerous." "I know," Darian said, "but some things are worth the risk." He left that same morning, retracing his path northward. The journey back felt both longer and shorter than it should have, his mind playing out 100 different scenarios of what might happen when he reached Grina's farm. She might reject him. She might be angry that he had returned. She might have already moved on, forgotten about the human stranger she had sheltered for a few days. But he had to try. He reached the river crossing in late afternoon and found the water had receded to normal levels. He paid the ferryman for passage across, earning a knowing look that he ignored. By the time he spotted the smoke from Grina's chimney, the sun was low on the horizon and his heart was pounding. He approached the farmstead slowly, suddenly uncertain. What if he had misread everything? What if that moment of connection he had felt was entirely one-sided? He was halfway to the door when it opened and Grina stepped out, a bucket in her hand as though she had been heading to the well. She froze when she saw him. The bucket fell from her nerveless fingers and hit the ground with a dull thud. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other across the distance. Then Grina moved, crossing the space between them with long strides that ate up the ground. "You came back," she said, and her voice was rough with an emotion Darian could not quite name. "Why did you come back?" "Because I could not stay away," Darian replied honestly. "Because every step I took away from here felt wrong. Because I spent 3 days thinking about amber eyes and careful hands and the bravest person I have ever met." Grina's breath hitched. "Darian, you cannot mean, I mean that I have feelings for you," he said, the words tumbling out now that he had started. "I know it is impossible. I know the whole world would stand against us. I know we barely know each other and this is probably foolish beyond measure, but I had to come back. I had to tell you the truth. Even if you do not feel the same, even if nothing can come of it, I could not live with myself if I did not try." Grina was trembling, he realized. Her hands had curled into fists at her sides and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "You stupid, brave, impossible man," she whispered. "I have thought of nothing but you since you left. I told myself it was foolishness, that you were just another human who would hurt me in the end. But I could not stop hoping you might return." could not stop wishing for something I had no right to want. Then we are both fools, Darian said softly. He closed the remaining distance between them, slowly enough that she could stop him if she wished. She did not. When he was close enough to touch, he reached up and carefully, tentatively, cupped her face in his hands. Her skin was warm beneath his palms, and she leaned into the touch like someone starved for gentleness. "I do not know how this can work," Grina said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The prejudice we will face will be worth it," Darian finished. "If you will have me, if you are willing to try despite everything that stands against us." "I am so tired of being alone," Grina admitted, and the vulnerability in her voice made his chest ache. "I am so tired of pretending I need no one. When you left, it felt like losing my father all over again, like watching the only light in my world walk away." "Then I will not walk away again," Darian promised. "Not unless you ask me to. I am here, Grina, for as long as you will have me." She made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob and closed the remaining distance between them, wrapping her arms around him in a fierce embrace. Darian held her just as tightly, his face pressed against her shoulder, and felt something in his chest finally settle into place. They stood like that for a long time, holding each other in the fading light. Finally, Grina pulled back just enough to look at him, and there was wonder in her eyes. "What do we do now?" she asked. "Now," Darian said, "we figure it out together, one day at a time." She smiled then, a real smile that transformed her entire face, and Darian thought he had never seen anything more beautiful. She led him back into the farmhouse, back to the warmth of her hearth, and this time when he crossed the threshold it felt like coming home. Over the following weeks, Darian settled into life on Grina's farm with surprising ease. He sent word to his brother that he would not be returning south just yet, and Daniel's reply was warmly supportive, wishing them both luck. The days fell into a comfortable rhythm. They worked side by side during the daylight hours, preparing the farm for winter. Darian proved useful with repairs and maintenance, his steady hands and careful attention to detail complementing Grina's strength and skill with construction. In the evenings they sat by the fire and talked, sharing stories of their pasts. Darian told her about his childhood before the war, growing up on his family's farm and learning his father's trade as a carpenter. He spoke of the conscription that had pulled him into military service, and the 3 years of fighting that had left him with scars both visible and hidden. He told her about the things he had seen and done that still haunted his dreams, and she listened without judgment, her presence a steady comfort. Grina shared her own history in return. She spoke of her father, a craftsman known throughout their clan for his skill with metalwork. She told him about growing up in a culture that valued strength and honor above all else, and how her father had taught her that true strength included the courage to be kind. She described the beauty of the northern highlands where her people had lived, the way the mountains caught the sunset and turned gold and crimson. "I miss it sometimes," she admitted one evening, staring into the flames. "The land, I mean. Not the clan that cast me out, but the place itself. It was home for so long. Perhaps one day it could be home again," Darian suggested carefully. "If things change, if the prejudice lessens." Grina shook her head. "I do not think that will happen in our lifetime. The hatred runs too deep on both sides. Humans fear orcs as monsters, and orcs see humans as treacherous invaders. We are caught between worlds, you and I, belonging fully to neither." "Then we will make our own world," Darian said. "Here on this farm. A place where what matters is not the color of our skin or the shape of our teeth, but the content of our hearts." She turned to look at him, and the firelight caught in her eyes made them glow like molten gold. "You make it sound simple." "It will not be simple," Darian acknowledged. But it will be worth it. You are worth it. Grina reached out and took his hand, lacing her larger fingers through his. They sat like that in comfortable silence, watching the fire burn down to embers, and Darian felt a peace he had not known since before the war. The first real test of their fragile new happiness came on a cold morning in late autumn. Darian was in the barn tending to the animals when he heard voices from the direction of the house. He stepped out into the yard and saw 3 human men standing near the front door. Travelers by the look of them, rough and road-worn. Grina stood in the doorway, her posture tense but controlled. Darian approached quickly, noting the way the men's hands rested near their weapons. They turned as he drew near, and he saw recognition flicker in their eyes as they took in his scars and bearing. "You are the one who answered the conscription from the hillside province," one of them asked. "Darian Morrow served under Captain Brennan." "I am," Darian confirmed cautiously. "What business is that of yours?" "We served in the same campaign," the man replied. His eyes flicked to Grina and hardened. "Though I am surprised to find a veteran living with an orc. Times must have changed more than I thought." There was an ugly undertone to his words, and Darian felt his shoulders tighten. "This is Grina's farm. I am a guest here. Is there something you need, or are you just passing through?" "We are passing through," another of the men said. "But we could use supplies. Water, food if you can spare it." "We can pay." "I have water," Grina said before Darian could respond. Her voice was even and carefully neutral. "And bread I can share. Wait here." She disappeared into the house, moving with deliberate calm. Darian stayed where he was, keeping himself between the travelers and the door. The 3 men exchanged glances, and the one who had spoken first gave Darian a considering look. "You fought orcs for 3 years," he said. "Watched good men die to their axes and arrows, and now you live with one. I cannot decide if you are brave or just a fool." "Neither," Darian replied quietly. "I am just a man who learned that not everything we were told during the war was true. Grina saved my life when she had no reason to. She has shown me more kindness and honor than most humans I have met. Whatever prejudices I held before, I have learned better since." "Prejudices?" The man's voice rose slightly, anger creeping in. "My brother died in the northern campaign, killed by an orc war party, and you call it prejudice to hate them for that." "I call it prejudice to judge all orcs by the actions of some," Darian said, keeping his voice level despite the tension coiling in his gut. "Just as it would be wrong to judge all humans by the worst among us. I am sorry for your loss, truly. But Grina is not responsible for your brother's death any more than you are responsible for the orc villages burned by human soldiers." The man's hand moved toward his sword, and Darian tensed, ready to defend himself despite being unarmed. But before the situation could escalate further, Grina emerged from the house carrying a cloth-wrapped bundle and a water skin. "Here," she said, offering them to the nearest man. "Bread and water. Safe travels to wherever you are going." The man who had lost his brother stared at her for a long moment, his hand still on his weapon. Then he seemed to deflate slightly, the anger draining from his face to be replaced by something more complex. He took the bundle from Grina with careful hands, as though afraid to touch her skin. "Thank you," he said gruffly. Then to Darian, "You are right. I am letting grief turn me into something bitter. My brother would not have wanted that." He paused, then added, "But you should know that not everyone will be understanding. What you two have here, many will see it as betrayal." "Be careful." "We will," Darian promised. "And thank you for the warning." The 3 men left, disappearing down the path toward the road. Darian waited until they were out of sight before letting out a long breath. When he turned back to the house, he found Grina watching him with an unreadable expression. "You defended me," she said softly. Against men who fought alongside you in the war. Of course I did, Darian replied. You are more important to me than their approval, than anyone's approval. Grina crossed to him and pulled him into a tight embrace. He held her, feeling the rapid beat of her heart against his chest. That could have gone badly, she murmured. They could have attacked. Others might not be so willing to listen. I know, Darian said. But we will face whatever comes together. I meant what I said before. I am not leaving. She pulled back to look at him, and there were tears on her cheeks. I do not deserve you. You deserve everything good in the world, Darian countered. And I plan to spend my life proving that to you, if you will let me. She kissed him then, fierce and desperate and full of all the emotion neither of them had words for. Darian returned it with equal intensity, pouring everything he felt into the press of lips and the tangle of breath. When they finally parted, both were shaking. I love you, Grina said, the words tumbling out as though she could not hold them back any longer. I know it is too soon and too foolish and too dangerous, but I love you, Darian Morrow. I think I have loved you since you stood in my home soaking wet and freezing and still found the grace to be honest with me. Joy surged through Darian so intensely it was almost painful. I love you too, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I have been trying to find the courage to say it for weeks. I love your strength and your kindness and the way you refuse to let the world make you cruel. I love every part of you. They held each other in the yard as the autumn wind picked up, and Darian knew with perfect certainty that whatever challenges lay ahead, this was exactly where he was meant to be. Winter came early that year, sweeping down from the mountains with bitter winds and heavy snow. The farmstead became an island of warmth in a frozen world, and Darian was grateful every day for Grina's foresight in preparing so thoroughly. They had wood enough to last through the cold months and food stores that would see them into spring. The animals were safely sheltered in the barn, and the house itself was sturdy and well built, keeping out the worst of the weather. The enforced closeness of winter only deepened their connection. They developed small routines and private jokes, learning each other's habits and preferences. Darian discovered that Grina sang while she worked, old orc songs in a language he did not understand but found beautiful nonetheless. She learned that he had a talent for carving and would spend hours by the fire creating small wooden figures that he gave to her with shy pride. They also learned to navigate the more intimate aspects of their relationship with patience and care. Cultural differences meant there were moments of confusion or awkwardness, but they worked through each one with humor and honest communication. Grina had never been with a human before, and Darian had certainly never been with an orc. But they learned together, finding ways to show affection that honored both their natures. One evening in deep winter, as they lay together in Grina's bed with snow falling softly outside the window, Darian traced the line of her jaw with gentle fingers. "What are you thinking?" Grina asked, her voice drowsy and content. "I am thinking about the future," Darian admitted. "About what comes after winter. About whether we stay here or look for somewhere more remote, somewhere we might face less prejudice." Grina was quiet for a moment, considering. "I have thought about this too. This farm is all I have. It is the home I built when I had nothing else. But I would give it up if staying here means constant danger for you." "I would never ask you to abandon your home," Darian said firmly. "We will make it work here, build relationships with the few neighbors we have. Prove that what we have is not a threat to anyone." "Some will never accept us," Grina pointed out, "no matter what we do." "Then we will survive despite them," Darian replied. "We have already survived so much. The river that nearly killed me, the prejudice of those travelers, a winter that would break lesser people. We can survive anything as long as we are together." Grina turned to face him fully, her amber eyes serious. "I need you to understand what you are choosing. If you stay with me, you will be giving up any chance of a normal life among humans. You will be marked as a traitor by some, a curiosity by others. You may never be fully accepted by human society again." "I understand," Darian said, "and I choose this anyway. I choose you, every time without hesitation." "Why?" The question was barely a whisper. "Why would you sacrifice so much for me?" "Because you are not a sacrifice," Darian replied simply. "You are a gift, the best thing that has ever happened to me. Being with you is not giving something up. It is gaining everything that matters." Grina's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "I will spend the rest of my life being worthy of that faith." "You already are," Darian assured her. He kissed her gently, sweetly, a promise made flesh. "Now sleep. Tomorrow we have work to do." They settled into each other's arms, warm and safe against the winter cold, and slept peacefully. Spring came slowly, the snow melting in reluctant patches and the frozen earth gradually giving way to mud, and then finally to green growing things. Darian and Grina emerged from their winter cocoon ready to face the world together. They planted crops, repaired winter damage to the farm buildings, and welcomed the return of traveling merchants and traders to the area. Most of the travelers treated them with wary respect, taking Grina's goods and services without comment about her orc heritage or Darian's presence at her side. A few were openly hostile, refusing to trade with an orc no matter how fair her prices. But there were also surprising moments of acceptance. An elderly woman who complimented Grina's weaving and invited them both to share a meal. A young couple who thanked them for directions to the next settlement and wished them well without a trace of judgment. It was not perfect, but it was better than Darian had feared. They were carving out a life together, one careful day at a time. In late spring, Daniel arrived for a visit. Darian spotted his brother coming up the path and felt a surge of nervousness. He had written to Daniel regularly through the winter, but letters were different from facing him in person, different from introducing him to Grina and seeing his reaction firsthand. Daniel embraced Darian warmly when he reached the farmstead, then turned to Grina with genuine courtesy. "You must be Grina," he said, offering his hand in the human custom. "My brother has written extensively about you. It is an honor to meet you." Grina shook his hand carefully, clearly surprised by his easy acceptance. "And you must be Daniel. Darian speaks of you often. You are welcome here." They settled into the house, and Daniel regaled them with news from the south. His farm was doing well, and he had met a woman he was courting. He spoke of local politics and weather and 100 small details of normal life. It was deeply ordinary and deeply comforting. Over supper, Daniel grew more serious. "I should tell you both that your relationship has become known in some circles. There are people talking, mostly harmless gossip, but some of it less friendly. I wanted you to be aware." "We expected as much," Darian said, though his stomach tightened at the confirmation. "Has there been any direct trouble?" "Not yet," Daniel replied carefully. "But I worry it is only a matter of time. There are people who see any human-orc relationship as dangerous, as threatening the fragile peace that has held since the war ended. You should be prepared for that." "What would you advise?" Grina asked quietly. Daniel looked at her with respect. "Honestly, keep doing what you are doing. Live your lives with dignity and prove through your actions that love between different peoples is possible. You will not change every mind, but you might change some, and those some might change others in time." "That could take years," Darian pointed out. "Probably generations," Daniel agreed. "But important change always does. You two are pioneers whether you intended to be or not. That comes with a burden, but also with the possibility of making the world better for those who come after." They talked long into the night, and by the time Daniel left the next morning, Darian felt strengthened by his brother's support. It mattered, knowing that at least one person from his old life accepted and understood what he had chosen. Summer brought more changes. Word of the orc woman and her human partner spread through the region, drawing both curiosity and concern. Some travelers went out of their way to trade with Grina, as though their patronage was a political statement. Others avoided the farm entirely, making long detours to bypass what they saw as a corrupting influence. Darian and Grina weathered it all with patience and stubborn determination. They continued their work, maintained their home, and treated everyone who came to their door with the same courtesy, regardless of how they were received in return. In midsummer, a young orc woman appeared at their door. She was travel-worn and nervous, her possessions carried in a ragged pack on her back. When Grina answered her knock, the young woman dropped to her knees. "Please," she said in the orcish language, then switched to heavily accented common. "Please, I need help. I have nowhere else to go." Grina pulled her inside immediately, and Darian watched as she settled the young orc in a chair and brought her food and water. The girl ate like she was starving, which she probably was, and gradually her story emerged. Her name was Kara, and she was from a clan in the eastern mountains. She had fallen in love with a human trader who passed through her territory regularly. When her family discovered the relationship, they had beaten her and cast her out, forbidding her to ever return. The trader had been driven away at spear point, and she had no idea if he still lived. She had heard rumors of an orc woman who lived with a human in the western frontier, and she had traveled for weeks hoping to find refuge. "You are safe here," Grina said firmly. "You may stay as long as you need. No one will harm you under this roof." Kara began to cry, great heaving sobs of relief and grief. Grina held her, murmuring comfort in their shared language, and Darian felt his heart break for this girl who had lost everything for the crime of loving. Kara stayed with them through the remainder of summer and into autumn. She helped with the farm work and slowly began to heal from the trauma of her exile. She was younger than Grina, barely into adulthood by orc standards, and she looked at Darian and Grina's relationship with a mixture of hope and longing. "You think my love survived?" she asked Darian one day as they worked in the garden. "Do you think he looks for me?" "I do not know," Darian admitted. "But if he loves you the way I love Grina, then yes. He looks for you, and he will not stop until he finds you or knows for certain that you are lost to him." Kara's eyes filled with tears. "I do not even know his name, not his full name. We had so little time together." "Then we will help you find him," Darian promised. "When the harvest is done and winter preparations are complete, we will make inquiries. Send word to the trading posts. If he is alive and looking for you, we will find a way to bring you together." Kara threw her arms around him in gratitude, and Darian hugged her back, thinking about how many others like her and Grina might be scattered across the land. How many people suffering for the crime of loving across the divide of species. That night, he spoke to Grina about an idea that had been forming in his mind. "What if we made this place more than just a farm?" he said as they prepared for bed. "What if we made it a refuge? A place where orcs and humans who love each other can come for shelter and support. We could help others the way Daniel helped me, the way you helped Kara." Grina was silent for a long moment, considering. "That would be dangerous. It would make us a target for those who hate what we represent." "It would," Darian agreed. "But it would also give hope to people who have none. It would prove that love is stronger than prejudice. That change is possible." "You are asking me to risk everything we have built," Grina said slowly. "I am asking if you think it is worth the risk," Darian corrected. "I will not push you into this, but I think we have a chance to do something important here, To create real change one person at a time, Grina reached out and took his hand, squeezing gently. My father would have loved this idea. He always believed that kindness had the power to transform the world. She paused, then smiled. Let us do it. Let us build something that matters. They began small, sending word through the network of traders and travelers that their farm was a safe haven for those fleeing prejudice. The response was slower than Darian expected, but more sustained. Over the following months, others came. A human man who had been disowned by his family for loving an orc warrior. An orc craftsman who had fallen for a human woman and been exiled from his clan. A young couple, both barely adults, who had run away together and needed shelter while they figured out where to go next. Darian and Grina housed them all, feeding them from their stores and helping them plan for the future. Some stayed only a few days before moving on. Others remained for weeks or months, contributing to the farm work in exchange for safety and shelter. The farmstead became a community, small but growing, and with each new arrival the impossible seemed a little less impossible. There were setbacks, of course. In late autumn, a group of human zealots attacked the farm one night, throwing rocks and shouting slurs. Darian and the others drove them off without serious injury, but the incident left everyone shaken. They built a fence after that and organized watch shifts so someone was always alert for danger. Winter came again, their second together, and the farmhouse was crowded with refugees and dreamers. They made it work through careful planning and shared labor. Food was stretched but never ran out. Firewood was rationed but kept everyone warm. And through it all, Darian and Grina remained the calm center, providing leadership and hope. On the longest night of winter, Kara's human trader arrived. His name was Thomas, and he had been searching for her since the day they were separated. He was thin from months of hard travel, scarred from encounters with bandits and worse, but his eyes when he saw Kara held everything that mattered. They fell into each other's arms weeping, and the whole household celebrated their reunion with impromptu music and dancing. Watching them, Darian felt Grina's hand slip into his. We did that, she murmured. We made that possible. We did, Darian agreed, and we will do it again. As many times as we can, spring returned, bringing with it new growth and new hope. Kara and Thomas married in a simple ceremony on the farmstead, with both human and orc witnesses standing together to celebrate their union. It was the first such wedding anyone in attendance had ever seen, and it felt like a moment of history being made. More refugees came as the weather warmed. The farmstead could not house them all, so Darian and Grina helped them establish small homesteads nearby. A community began to form, loose-knit, but united by shared values. Humans and orcs working side by side, building lives together despite everything the world told them was impossible. There were still difficulties. Some of the new arrivals struggled with the prejudices they had been raised with. Arguments broke out, old hatreds flared, but Darian and Grina worked patiently to mediate conflicts and help people see past their assumptions. It was exhausting work, but it mattered. In early summer, Grina pulled Darian aside one evening with a serious expression. I have something to tell you, she said, and I do not know how you will respond. Darian's stomach clenched with worry. What is it? Are you ill? Has something happened? I am with child, Grina said quietly. Our child, I only became certain today. Darian stared at her, the words not quite processing. Then joy exploded through him so intensely he could barely breathe. A child. We are going to have a child. Yes, Grina said, and now she was smiling despite her nervousness. I know this complicates things. I know raising a half-orc child will bring new challenges. But I want this, Darian. I want our child. I want it too, Darian said fiercely. He pulled her into his arms and held her tight. "Gods, Grina, I want everything with you. A child, a life, a future. All of it." They stood together in the fading light, holding each other and dreaming of the small life growing between them. It was terrifying and wonderful in equal measure, this tangible proof of their love. The news spread through their small community quickly, and the response was overwhelmingly positive. The other residents brought gifts and well wishes. Kara wept with joy and immediately began making plans for baby clothes. Even the most reserved of their neighbors softened at the announcement, the fundamental human response to new life transcending prejudice. But there were darker responses too. Word reached them that some in the larger towns were calling their community an abomination. There was talk of official action, of soldiers being sent to scatter the settlement. Darian took the warning seriously and began quietly preparing defenses. He taught the other residents basic combat skills and organized supply caches in case they needed to flee quickly. He hoped it would not come to that, but he would not risk Grina or their child through complacency. Summer passed into autumn, and Grina's pregnancy became obvious. She continued working as long as she was able, stubborn and strong, but eventually she had to concede to rest more often. Darian fretted over her constantly, earning fond exasperation from both Grina and the other women in the community. "I am not fragile," Grina told him one evening as he insisted on bringing her yet another pillow. "Orc women have been giving birth since the beginning of time. I will survive this." "I know," Darian said, "but I am allowed to worry. This is my first child, our first child. Everything feels momentous." Grina's expression softened. "You will be a good father. You already care so deeply." "I want to give our child everything," Darian admitted. "Safety, love, a world where they are accepted for who they are. I know I cannot guarantee any of that, but I will spend my life trying." "That is all any parent can do," Grina replied. "Try their best and hope it is enough." The first snow fell in late autumn, and with it came trouble. A group of soldiers arrived at the settlement, not many but enough to be intimidating. They were led by a captain who introduced himself as Marcus Stone, a man with hard eyes and a harder reputation. Darian met him at the boundary of their land, keeping himself between the soldiers and the farmstead. "What do you want?" he asked bluntly. "We have received reports of an illegal settlement here," Captain Stone replied, "of orcs and humans living together in violation of the peace accords. I am here to investigate and, if necessary, disperse the residents." "There is nothing illegal about what we are doing," Darian said, though his heart hammered with fear. "We own this land legally. We trade fairly. We cause no harm to anyone." "You are harboring enemy combatants," the captain countered. "Orcs who should have been relocated after the war ended. That alone is grounds for action." "The orcs here are civilians," Darian argued. "They fought in no battles. They are guilty of nothing except falling in love with the wrong people according to some outdated prejudice." Captain Stone's expression did not change. "I have my orders. I will need to inspect the settlement and interview the residents. After that, I will decide what action to take." Darian wanted to refuse, to tell this man to leave and never return. But he knew that would only make things worse. So he agreed to the inspection, praying that cooler heads would prevail. The soldiers spent 2 days examining the settlement, questioning residents and making notes in official-looking ledgers. Captain Stone was thorough but not unnecessarily cruel. He spoke to everyone, human and orc alike, asking about their circumstances and how they came to be here. When he finally requested a meeting with Darian and Grina, they prepared for the worst. They sat across from him in the farmhouse, Grina's pregnancy obvious, and waited for his judgment. "This is an unusual situation," Captain Stone began. "I will not pretend otherwise. By the strict letter of the law, there are grounds to disperse this settlement. The peace accords did specify that orcs were to remain in designated territories. Those territories are death traps," Grina said quietly. "Barren land where nothing grows. Where we are expected to slowly starve out of sight. Is that what your precious peace demands? Our slow extinction?" Something flickered in the captain's eyes. "I fought in the war. I killed orcs. Many orcs. I did it because I was told they were monsters who would destroy us all if given the chance." He paused. "But I have spent 2 days here watching orcs and humans work together, share meals, raise children. I have seen none of the monstrousness I was promised. Only people trying to survive and be happy." Hope flickered in Darian's chest. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that my report will state that I found a peaceful farming community engaged in legal trade and causing no trouble to anyone," Captain Stone replied. "I am saying that sometimes the laws need to catch up with what is right. And I am saying that you people have more courage than I ever did." He stood and offered his hand to Darian. "Keep building this place, make it work, and maybe someday the rest of the world will follow your example." Darian shook his hand, almost dizzy with relief. "Thank you. You will never know what this means to us." "I think I do," the captain said. He nodded to Grina. "Congratulations on the child. May they grow up in a better world than the one we made." The soldiers left that afternoon, and the entire settlement celebrated their reprieve. It was not a permanent solution. They all knew that. But it was hope. It was proof that some people could see past prejudice when confronted with the truth. Winter settled in for real after that, and the community turned inward, focused on survival and preparation. Grina's pregnancy progressed normally, and as her time drew near, the other women organized themselves into a support network. Kara and the other orc women shared knowledge of orcish birthing traditions. The human women contributed their own customs. Together they created something new, a blending of cultures that felt right. The baby came on a night of soft snow, with the wind howling outside and the fire burning bright inside. Darian held Grina's hand through the long hours of labor, feeling helpless and awed in equal measure. The other women worked efficiently around him, offering encouragement and practical support. When the baby finally arrived, a strong wailing announcement of their presence, Darian felt tears streaming down his face. The midwife cleaned the infant and wrapped them in soft cloth before placing the baby in Grina's arms. "A son," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "We have a son, Darian." Darian looked down at the tiny face, green-skinned like his mother but with features that blended both parents. He had small tusks just beginning to show in Darian's dark hair. He was beautiful and perfect and absolutely terrifying in his fragility. "Hello, little one," Darian whispered. "Welcome to the world." They named him Garrett, a name that worked in both human and orcish traditions. He was healthy and strong, with lungs that could wake the dead when he wanted feeding. Darian threw himself into fatherhood with absolute devotion, learning to change nappies and soothe crying and all the thousand small tasks that came with a newborn. Grina recovered quickly from the birth, her orc constitution serving her well. Within days, she was up and moving, though Darian and the others insisted she take things slowly. She divided her time between caring for Garrett and managing the settlement, proving she could do both with the same competence she brought to everything. As winter slowly gave way to spring, Garrett grew and thrived. He was a happy baby, quick to smile and curious about everything. The entire community doted on him, treating him like a collective child. He was proof of what they were all fighting for, tangible evidence that love could bridge any divide. One warm spring evening, Darian stood in the doorway of the farmhouse watching Grina rock Garrett to sleep in the chair by the fire. The sight filled him with such profound contentment that it was almost painful. This was his family, his home, everything that mattered. Grina looked up and caught him watching. "What are you thinking?" she asked softly. "I am thinking about the night I stumbled out of that river half dead," Darian replied. "How I thought I had reached the end of something, but really I was at the beginning. The beginning of everything that would matter." "You were quite pathetic that night," Grina teased gently, "soaking wet and shivering like a drowned rat." "And you took me in anyway," Darian said. "Dried my boots and made me supper and saved my life in every way that matters. I will never stop being grateful for that kindness." "Come here," Grina said, holding out one hand. Darian crossed to her and she pulled him down for a kiss, careful not to disturb the sleeping baby in her arms. "I am grateful, too, for your courage in coming back. For choosing me and this life even when it would have been easier to walk away. For giving me a family when I thought I would be alone forever." "Never alone," Darian promised. "Not as long as I breathe." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching their son sleep and listening to the sounds of their community settling in for the night. Outside, spring was transforming the land, bringing new growth and new possibilities. Inside, the fire burned steady and warm, a beacon against the darkness. It had not been easy, this life they had built. There had been fear and pain and moments when everything seemed impossible, but they had persevered together, and in doing so had created something precious. A home where love mattered more than prejudice. A community where different peoples could live in harmony. A family that proved the best parts of humanity and orc kind could exist in one small person. Darian thought about the future, about the world Garrett would grow up in. He hoped it would be kinder than the one they had known. Hoped that their small community would be the first of many, that someday humans and orcs living together would be commonplace rather than revolutionary. But even if that day never came, even if they remained isolated and struggling against prejudice for the rest of their lives, it would be enough. Because they had each other, because they had chosen love over fear, because every morning Darian woke to Grina's smile, and every evening he held his son in his arms and knew he was exactly where he belonged. The seasons turned, one year flowing into the next. The settlement grew slowly but steadily, attracting more refugees and dreamers. They built new homes, expanded their fields, and created systems of trade with the few merchants willing to do business with them. It was never easy, but it was always worthwhile. Garrett grew from infant to toddler to young boy, bright and energetic and completely unaware that some people thought his very existence was wrong. He played with the other children in the settlement, both human and orc, learning to speak both languages and seeing nothing strange in the mixture of cultures around him. He was the future they were all working toward, living proof that different peoples could not only coexist, but create something beautiful together. Other mixed families formed in the settlement. Thomas and Kara had a daughter who became Garrett's best friend. 2 more couples married, and more children followed. The community developed its own identity, its own traditions that blended the best of human and orcish customs. There were still difficult moments. Traders who refused to deal with them. Travelers who hurled insults or threats. Occasional raids by those who saw them as a stain on the land. But they weathered each challenge together, and with every year that passed their roots grew deeper. On Garrett's 5th birthday, the settlement held a celebration that drew visitors from 3 neighboring communities. Humans and orcs who had heard about this strange place where the old hatreds did not hold sway. Some came out of curiosity, some out of hope, and some out of a desire to prove it could not last. Darian stood at the edge of the gathering, watching children of multiple species play together without a trace of the prejudice that had defined his generation. Grina came to stand beside him, slipping her hand into his. "We did this," she said quietly. "Built something worth protecting." "We did," Darian agreed, "and it will outlast us. Even if everything fell apart tomorrow, these children know it is possible. They will carry that knowledge forward." "Ever the optimist," Grina teased, but there was warmth in her voice. "I learned it from you," Darian replied. "From an orc woman who could have turned away a freezing human but chose kindness instead." Grina leaned her head against his shoulder, and they stood together watching their community celebrate. The future was uncertain, as it always had been. There would be more challenges, more prejudice to overcome, more battles to fight. But they would face all of it together, and that made everything possible. As the sun set on that spring evening, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Darian felt a deep and abiding peace. He had found his home in the most unlikely place, with the most unlikely person. And in doing so, he had helped build something that mattered. A community of hope. A family of choice. A future where love was stronger than hate. The path forward would not be easy, but it would be worthwhile. And that, in the end, was everything that mattered. Years continued to pass, each season bringing new growth and new challenges to their community. Garrett grew into a thoughtful young man who carried himself with quiet confidence, never ashamed of his mixed heritage, but always aware of the responsibility that came with it. He learned his father's carpentry skills and his mother's practicality, becoming someone the community could rely on. Darian's hair began to show threads of gray, and Grina developed laugh lines at the corners of her eyes. They aged together with the comfort of long partnership, their love deepening with every shared sunrise and weathered storm. The farmstead that had once been Grina's solitary refuge became the heart of a thriving village where humans and orcs worked side by side as naturally as breathing. One autumn evening, as Darian and Grina sat on the porch watching the sun set over fields they had planted together, Garrett approached with a young orc woman at his side. Both looked nervous and hopeful in equal measure. "Mother, father," Garrett began, formal in his anxiety. "This is Mira. We wish to marry, and we are asking for your blessing." Darian looked at the young woman, seeing in her nervous posture an echo of Grina from years ago. He glanced at his wife and saw the same memory reflected in her eyes. They had not built this community so their children could hide who they loved. They had built it so love could flourish freely. "You have our blessing," Grina said warmly, rising to embrace them both. "And our joy. Welcome to our family, Mira." The wedding was held the following spring, a celebration that drew visitors from all across the region. Even some who had once been skeptical of what this community represented came to witness the union, and many left with softened hearts. Change came slowly, but it did come, one changed mind at a time. Standing at the edge of the celebration, watching his son dance with his new wife, Darian felt Grina's familiar presence at his side. She took his hand, her larger fingers lacing through his with the ease of decades of practice. "Do you remember that night?" she asked softly. "When you limped out of the river more dead than alive?" "Every detail," Darian replied. "The cold, the fear, the light of your window. The moment you opened the door and I thought I might die anyway because you were an orc and I was a human and the whole world said we were enemies." "I remember too," Grina said. "How you looked up at me with those desperate eyes. How I almost closed the door. How something made me reach out instead." She paused, her thumb tracing circles on his palm. "I had your boots dried and supper waiting before I even knew your name. Some part of me recognized you, I think. Knew you would matter." "You saved my life that night," Darian said, "in every way possible." You gave me not just shelter but a reason to keep living. A home, a family, a purpose. You saved mine too, Grina countered gently. I was so alone, Darian, so certain I would live and die in isolation, never trusting anyone again. And then you came back. You chose me over everything else. You showed me that kindness was not weakness, that love could triumph over hate. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the celebration continue around them. Their community, their family, their legacy. All of it had grown from that single night when compassion trumped fear, when one orc woman chose to help a freezing human rather than turn him away. I would do it all again, Darian said quietly. Every difficult moment, every challenge, all of it exactly the same because it led to this. To you. To everything that matters. As would I, Grina replied, though perhaps next time you could avoid nearly drowning in a river crossing. Darian laughed, the sound full of joy and peace. I will do my best. As the stars emerged overhead and the celebration continued around them, Darian pulled Grina close. She came willingly, fitting against him as perfectly as she had from the beginning. They had built something remarkable together, a community founded on the radical belief that love could bridge any divide. And in doing so, they had proven that the bravest thing anyone could do was choose kindness, even when the world said it was impossible. The future stretched before them, uncertain but full of possibility. There would be more challenges, more moments when everything seemed poised to fall apart. But they would face those moments together as they always had. And their example would light the way for others, showing that a better world was not just a dream but something they could build with their own hands, one choice at a time. Darian thought about that desperate man who had emerged from the river crossing so long ago, broken and freezing and certain he was about to die alone in the wilderness. He wished he could go back and tell that man what waited for him, the love he would find, the family he would build, the community that would grow from one simple act of kindness. But perhaps it was better that he had not known. Perhaps the courage to knock on that door, to accept help from someone the world called enemy, came from not knowing what it would cost or what it would bring. Sometimes the bravest acts happened when people simply chose to be kind in the moment, without thought for the consequences. And so the story that began with a river crossing and an orc woman's choice continued, rippling outward in ways neither Darian nor Grina could have imagined. They had taken their individual loneliness and transformed it into something that mattered, proving that the simplest acts of kindness could change not just individual lives but entire communities. As the celebration wound down and guests began to depart, as their son and his new wife slipped away to begin their own journey together, Darian and Grina remained on the porch. They held each other under the stars, two people who had found their home in each other and knew themselves blessed beyond measure. The night was peaceful, filled with the sounds of contentment and joy. In the morning there would be work to do, challenges to face, a community to nurture. But tonight was for celebration. Tonight was for remembering how far they had come and dreaming of how far they might yet go. Darian tightened his arms around Grina, breathing in the familiar scent of her, feeling the steady beat of her heart against his chest. This was everything. This moment, this person, this life they had built together. Nothing else mattered nearly as much. I love you, he whispered into her hair. Now and always, until my last breath and beyond. I love you too, Grina replied, her voice steady and sure. My brave, foolish, wonderful human. Thank you for limping out of that river and into my life. They stood together as the stars wheeled overhead, as the seasons turned and the years flowed onward. They had found each other against all odds, built something beautiful against all opposition, and created a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. And it had all begun with the simplest choice: to show kindness to a stranger, to see past fear to the person beneath, to believe that love could triumph over hate. In the end, that was all anyone could do. Make the choice to be kind, even when it was difficult, especially when it was difficult. Because kindness had the power to transform everything, to build bridges where walls once stood, to create hope where there was once only despair, to prove that a better world was always possible for those brave enough to fight for it. And as Darian held Grina under the starlight, surrounded by the community they had built and the family they had created, he knew with perfect certainty that every step of the journey had been worthwhile. Every hardship, every moment of fear, every challenge overcome. All of it had led to this perfect moment of peace and love and belonging. He had limped out of that river half dead and desperate, and Grina had been waiting with dried boots and supper, and a kindness that changed everything. That single moment had blossomed into a lifetime of love, a community of hope, and a future bright with possibility. It was enough. It was everything, and it was exactly where they both belonged.